side. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank Bharat. That was, I love that album that he was playing of Swami's music, singing those chants, those bhajans. And it conveys such a sweet devotional feeling whenever I listen to that, and it's very inspiring to me. And I thought it was a very good one to choose as an introduction to today's topic, which is feeling, that aspect of consciousness of feeling. And I chose as a topic to, you might say, to contrast it to what some people feel, because they don't, I mean, feeling, one of the aspects I guess I'm trying to say of feeling that is expressed by some is emotion. And there's a difference between emotion and feeling. And let's explore that a little bit today, because I think it's a very important topic, because you don't find any saint, any great person of spiritual development who is not joyful, not doesn't have a developed feeling nature. And it's always goes back to something Swami Kriyananda always used to say: a sad saint is a sad saint indeed. In other words, somebody who, sadness, of course, is not you might say, an expression of disappointment or rejection. And of course, that's not something that a great saint would express. You look at the lives of the great ones, and they have individual natures. The great ones, saints, some are joyful. Now that was, of course, Paramhansa Yogananda was like that. He was a saint of joy. He was a saint of love, yes, but his essential nature was joyful. And so you just felt this exuberant joyfulness that was flowing out of him. Now, not all saints express themselves in that way. Some were more loving, and you could, and I've met some very, I think of exalted souls that exuded a certain calm kindliness, but that too is a feeling. But nevertheless, I think all of them probably enjoyed a good joke and saw the humor in life's situation. And it always came from a sense of inner deep feeling. And it makes you realize, or wonder actually, that what separates, it's that quality that separates humanity from being a robot or mechanistic. And I wonder, quite honestly, is it possible will mankind and scientists ever be able to develop a robot that can embody that quality of feeling? You look at a robot, you see they make them highly intelligent. You can beat anybody in chess and other games of logic, extreme logic. Yes, and I guess logic is an aspect of intelligence, or sort of in a mechanical way of all possibilities being analyzed until you come to the one that works. Well, yes, but is that what it means to be human? A human, and it's an aspect of intelligence, maybe close to the mind, mon, buddhi, and then you go beyond those two and you come to those two more subtle ones: ahankara, that sense of ego, individuality, a sense of self. And what manifests that really is this fourth aspect known as chitta, that ability to feel, the feeling element of consciousness that brings subjectiveness to life. And of course, it's also, it has positive and negative sides to that. It expresses itself, but it's that quality of our ability to experience pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment. Some of those are outward, but also empathy, compassion, and of course, as I said, ego, that sense of self-identity, intuition, that sense of I that makes us human, in other words. And can a robot embody that someday? Swami used to say, well, if they ever could make a robot sometime in the far future, it would have to be, you couldn't equate it to humanity and to a human unless it had the ability to be inhabited by a soul. And can mankind reach to that ability? Well, I don't know, but it's certainly not what we see today. But this feeling aspect is what you could say makes us human, and it's expressed in different ways, especially this feeling element. And so that music and singing is something that is very expressive of feeling. And in Swami's case, the music we were listening to there, devotional, a love, devotion, and you could feel that coming through that music. And so it's also, without feeling, we wouldn't have the ability to experience true joy, true peace, those true experiential realities that we talk about when we talk about meditation, those aspects of God. But it also, we realize, emotions can be expressed, or feeling can be expressed outwardly. And you could say that is the criteria for the difference between emotion and pure feeling. Feeling is something that's inward. It's felt inwardly. It's not dependent outwardly, and it doesn't go out. And feeling doesn't have a direct opposite because it's not part of the waves. To the degree that we feel it, in other words, I feel up and I feel down, there's still an ego element in there. But once we go beyond ego, which you might say ego is accompanies, and one of the defining things that characterize emotion, once we go beyond ego, we feel then we are experiencing pure feeling. But even through the ego, we experience feeling. But because it's waves, we experience it in plus and minus ways. And emotions, typically, when we think of, oh, a person's emotional, oftentimes we're thinking of those negative sides of that disturbed feeling, you could say, positive or negative, you could say is disturbed, but disturbed feeling directed outward into the world is, you might say, through the ego, is what we speak of when we speak of emotions. And the negative emotions of those things, you could say, you could say in anger and desire and fear and so on, but you think it's those things that get us into trouble. And those things that are, that you might say, bring our life force down into the body and create trouble for us in the future, because actually create karma for us is what it's doing. But of course, karma is not necessarily in its pure sense good or bad. It's how we experience it. But you could say it brings us suffering. That karma we consider bad is those things that bring us pain and suffering. And so emotions are those things, those expressions of feeling through the ego that eventually are going to bring us trouble. And it's likes, dislikes, attachments, desires, frustrated desire, which is also another word for anger. These are the things, those emotional feelings that well up within us, and it's feeling, that's that feeling nature, and it's going outward. And this is something we need to realize, that it's the feeling is human. And so a person thinks, well, if I didn't have emotions, I'd just be a robot. I'd be dead. I'd be dead to the world. So it's better to have some feeling than no feeling. Well, yes, I guess you could make an argument maybe for that. But why not? Let's learn to be able to go beyond those outward expressions of feeling and go for the real, instead of counterfeit. Why don't we go for the real thing? And so, but nevertheless, it is true that people, they rather feel something rather than nothing. And yeah, I would agree with that. That's better, but yet it's only a step. And it's a mistake to think that feelings in themselves are, if you don't have any emotions, you're not going to have any feelings. That's not true at all. And so consequently, we need to think, how can we separate those two? And how can we overcome that emotional reaction to life and begin to think in terms of feeling in its more pure sense? Now, even outward emotions that are, you might say, more of a positive, people that, which we all do, we something is pleasurable or pleasant, we have this outward reaction to it. That's not bad. But Master would say, well, but you don't want to habituate yourself to those outward feelings alone. Yes, it's fun to laugh at a good joke, but too much laughter at a good joke makes you dependent on those. It's the outwardness that was, he says, keep it in moderation. And I guess the point would be keep it under control. You could say that for negative emotions too. They're not good, but if they're in our control, well, then maybe we can learn to be able to, by getting control of that energy behind those emotions, whether positive or negative, we can then learn to channel them into, you might say, a more positive direction, just like a habit or a stream. Think of something, I would say in terms of, if you look at people who are, you might say, addicted to emotions, let's say positively, let's say people who are the life of the party, that are giddy, that are always very outward. And you even look at comedians. Oftentimes comedians are very much an up and down in their consciousness. And sometimes they're very unhappy people when they're not making jokes, because it's their life force is going out and they're subjecting themselves to the waves of up and downs. And so they can be very moody. And even we've talked about in the past, moods are a natural result of too much outwardness in our emotional feelings. And Master had certain disciples in his ashram who like to joke a lot, like to carouse, and were outwardly that way. And he would advise, says, don't be so outward in that way. Try to keep it under control. Yet it doesn't mean you shouldn't laugh when you laugh, but let it be heartfelt from inside, an expression of pure joy. As Master was. Master used to tell jokes and he would laugh and laugh and laugh, but there was a pureness of joy there, and it was never harmful or hurtful to other people. And I guess I've heard people say, well, sometimes it just feels so good just to get it out there. It's like you got everything bottled up. You have your feelings bottled up. Some people are like that. They're just they're afraid of letting it out. And so they just says, well, you better to let it out. Well, I guess if you let it out in front of a mirror, maybe that's one thing, but don't let it out in front of other people. So, because what happens, this outward expression of emotional feeling can be like bombs being set off. And especially if you direct those, and we know this because we've probably all done it at one time or another. We get angry, we direct it at somebody, and we just feel regret afterwards because we know it wasn't a good thing to do. And so consequently, sometimes you just feel that, that frustration. I know. I felt sometimes somebody is just like, oh, I just want to, say something to that person. And I restrain myself, just like we should. But sometimes you just go by yourself, doggone it, and yes, you're getting it out of your system. I don't, sometimes it's just a relief. When you have an emotional relief of any sort, that you just have to say something, do something, and hopefully without harming anybody else, it does feel a certain pleasurable feeling of relaxation comes when you release tension, just like when you tense the body real hard, and then you let the tension go, you feel that sense of relief that allows you then to go deeper into it. Emotions are a little bit like that too, but You don't really get rid of that emotional feeling by doing that. You just postpone it and it comes back again and again. Ultimately, we need to be able to transcend that. But primarily, my point here is, if you find yourself subject to emotional release in a negative way, don't aim it at somebody else, because that's where you cause the trouble. You see, you've hurt other people, subjected them, you could say, and ultimately you've damaged yourself, because the karmic pendulum will ultimately swing. And so you have to keep it within control. But better yet, of course, is learning to overcome that within yourself. And then it's not good. You do have to keep in mind, it's not good to suppress emotions. We don't want to, you could say, hurt anybody with those emotions, but suppression, becoming so bound up that you become like the damage there might be that you become like a robot, or unfeeling and uncaring. That's another tactic that people use. They said, well, I don't want to feel, because feeling, I can feel, if I feel joy, I feel love, I feel happiness. What happens if the world turns around and circumstances go against me? And if I start to feel, and even, I don't have the ability to feel perfectly inwardly, I'm not non-attached, I have attachments. So if I feel and I'm attached, I'm going to be pained when things go wrong. If I love somebody, well, what happens if they leave? They're going to betray me, they're going to go, and I'm ultimately going to feel pain. Well, probably, maybe, yes. So is the answer then to completely turn ourselves off from feeling? Yeah, I think we all try that sometimes, and I think we all learn it doesn't work that way, because you just substitute one negative possibility for another. And you have to, it's transcendence is the answer, not suppression. What avails suppression, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita? You can't suppress. You have to act, and you have to do your best, and you suffer the consequences. But bottling up is not going to be the answer, even though subjecting yourself to the consequences of negative emotion ultimately you'll get yourself into trouble. But ideally, we get ourselves into trouble and we learn the lessons. And this is what we're trying to do. Now, remember something I said here. What's the answer to this? There is a connection between ego and negative outward emotion, the sense of I-ness. And it's that sense of ego, I am the one experiencing this. I am the one creating these waves. I am the one that it's enjoying the fruits of my emotional outburst. And I'm the one that's also enjoying the negative consequences of that. And so the answer ultimately is that we have to go beyond this ego consciousness of I-ness, the little I who's enjoying this world and ultimately enjoying riding on the surface ups and downs of those waves. We get to the point where we don't get rid of that. I mean, we don't kill that I. What we do is we transcend it. Like Master said in his poem, the little ego, see is like a bubble. I see myself. I now identify myself with the cosmic sea. And I see that ego as but a little bubble floating within me. So you can see that you've transcended the ego still plays its role. And, the ego never completely dies in that way. It always exists, even in superconscious nirvikalpa samadhi. It always still exists, but as a memory. It's not our reality, but we remember it. but our identity has been transferred to the larger cosmic sea. And this is the ultimate answer, of course, to overcoming the effects, the karmic effects of ego consciousness, and of ultimately to emotions. But it's good to know the goal that we're after, but is it a reality for us in day to day? To some degree, yes. Master used to say, live in the self. Try to maintain that sense of self-awareness, that self-consciousness that I am acting. He said, then go out from the self to do your actions in day-to-day life. You eat, you interact, you enjoy in this world, but then always return to the self. And this is what we do when we meditate, but not just when we meditate, when we act in this world. Feel yourself in your inner center. Now, the heart center is the center of chitta. It's the center of there. And, here's the center of the intellect, that sense of that we project from. But this is why Master said, keep your attention here at the point between the eyebrows. But from that attention of keeping yourself there centered, you also at the same time can feel there in between with the two, in balance. And you go out from that and then interact in the world, but always keeping that sense of self that my higher self am acting in this world. And to the degree that you don't forget that, you'll find yourself not so easily drawn out in a reactive process. Because isn't that what emotions come down to? It's reaction. The reaction to what happens to us outside ourselves. Why do we get angry? Something happened and it flares up. It's like good word, flare. It's like a cosmic flare, bursts into existence. And we lose our sense of balance. And it's a matter of training our sense of ourselves to be in that state of inward balance at all times. But we go out, we lose ourselves, come back again. And little by little, we begin to moderate those ups and downs. It doesn't go away all at once, but we learn to moderate it. We keep our attention like as if you can personalize it and think you're sitting on the banks of the stream with God, looking at the passage of life. And every once in a while, you get hooked, by something, and then you come back and God is with you. God's hooked you also, and God is drawing you back to your center. Think of it in the same way that we approach habits. Emotions are just like that. They're habitual. The habit of reacting in a certain way is the first thing is we observe it and become aware of it. Yes, I have this habit of reacting. I have this habit of getting angry. I have this habit of just emotionally reacting to this or that. If you are aware of it, that's the first step. And then you begin to learn to withdraw it. And it's like when you have a habit, you realize it's the same energy that's going out into that expression of emotional outburst. We don't kill it. It's like Krishna says, nothing dies. We just direct it into a different direction. And so consequently, at first maybe you get angry, but you don't get angry at somebody else. You express your anger in some other way. Chop wood or nobody's around and you give a primal scream, they say, that therapy that somebody came up with. Well, again, it's better than venting on somebody else. But it's actually the chop wood analogy or example is actually good. You get out and you do something and you express that anger in some constructive way, a neutral way even. If it's not constructive, at least it's neutral. And you're aware of it. That's it. Keeping our attention of what's going on within ourselves. And you learn not to express it this way, but I'm going to express it in a neutral or better way. And then you begin to put it into, maybe I can express that in a positive way and else. Because what is, let's say, anger, for example, it's fervor. I'm fervent. So I'm getting, maybe somebody's done something wrong and maybe you have a sense of righteous anger. They shouldn't do that. It's a bad thing to do. And you get really angry at them because somebody else did something that you consider wrong. Well, there's a certain positiveness into it because you're trying to perhaps be dharmic and you want dharma to win. And so but you've expressed it in a wrong way. Master scolded one of his disciples who was very, very fervent in his anger at somebody who was doing a little bit of embezzlement within the organization that he had set up. And Master said, yes, you should, to bring that to attention was a good thing, but you don't have to do it angrily. You see, you don't have, and so this, you could say that any kind of fervor that expressed, you could say, expressed emotionally in a negative way is something we need to control ourselves with. There's a story of Master once. He was I think it was when he was in Mexico. There was a student of his, a disciple of his that was there. And this disciple was very fervent, very devoted. And it was a young lady. And Master kind of just asked a little question. Maybe he saw something in her karma, I don't know. But he asked her, says, how do you feel about marriage? And she reacted, she said, with great vigor, she says, I have given my life to God. And Master says she fairly shouted at him when she said that, I've given my life to God and I will continue to serve God alone, without a husband, without a mate, faithfully, devotedly, every year of my life until I die. Well, Master was taken aback and he said, my goodness. And then he says, well, he admired her fervent devotion in that way. He says, but why the emotion? Seek God, yes, but in calmness. And I think what he was probably saying is because when anybody is so fervent that they're so emotional about it, like this young lady or that fellow who got angry at the person who was a little bit crooked, when you're emotionally that way, in a sense, you're reacting to something, isn't it? There's a reaction to it. And that reaction inevitably is going to push the pendulum. And it's probably you're reacting to something inside yourself. And I think emotion traces itself to that. Why get angry at somebody else? Probably it's because you see a little bit of that inside yourself. And that's what you're getting angry at. You have that potential. And so how do you work that out? Is it maybe that young woman, she had some deep-seated desire to be married, and she didn't want it to be that because she was afraid of it. She had been hurt, perhaps, in the back incarnations ago. Something was probably there that she was reacting against. And it's the principle of magnetism. When you have that much magnetism in one direction, you're going to attract the circumstances for you to have to work that out. Now, so consequently, if you're really, I've heard like monastic men say, they're very fervent in them. I want to take up with the monastic path with great ardor. I admire the devotion. I don't admire the emotion. And if there's emotion behind your devotion, well, then you have to watch out. So you see this expressed in people's devotional expression for God. When it becomes the devotion for God is great. And you could feel that going back to that music of Swami's, you could feel that devotion in Swami's words and in his music, but it wasn't emotional. And so lots of people, they chant Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, and they get, they lose themselves in emotion. Well, emotion ultimately is but a wave. And when a wave rises far up, down it goes when things go wrong and something else has happened or they end up being challenged. And so this is the problem here. We want to feel that pure feeling of devotion in the heart and then gather it up. And maybe you're expressing a little outward. Obviously, if you're working and talking and interacting with people, it's going to come off, and you still have ego. It's going to come out a little bit. But yet at the same time, you're channeling that energy that's been awakened, and you're controlled. You're in control of your emotion, and then you can direct it upward. And so your fervor is to be admired. But when you feel that fervor, stay in the self and then begin to develop that and direct it upward. And so this is something to keep in mind, to watch these two. Don't suppress it. And that's so that, because we make mistakes so often, and I mentioned this already, but I want to come back. We make mistakes again and again and again through our emotions. And you just say, I did it again. I'm going to work on it. And next time I'm going to do better. And you do it again. But you keep at it. That's the thing. Don't be, guilt against yourself because you blew it again. That's also an emotion. Regret is an emotion. Anger, fear, all of these things, they are emotional feelings. And when you have those feelings, what happens is they take up all the space. They eat up all the oxygen, you could say, and then there's no oxygen for you'd been able to do what we need to do. So you can't withdraw from it. We have to act in this world. We have to fight the battle, you could say. But our goal is to do it in calmness. And this is the element that's the antidote for emotions, is calmness. Feel that calmness. That too is a feeling. It's a divine feeling. And when we go into meditation, we start by feeling peace. Peace is the cessation, you could say, of disturbance. But calmness is deeper than peace. Calmness is that positive placement of ourself in stillness that comes when we neutralize the emotional likes and dislikes of the heart. The waves become calm. Peace is somewhat temporary, transitory. It's a temporary state, but it probably is what we're going to feel first. And so you use peace as the doorway to really going into the heart and feeling the calmness of the mind and of the heart together. And it's in calmness that we overcome the waves of likes and dislikes. And when we overcome those likes or dislikes, or at least moderate them, then ego begins to recede a little bit. And as ego recedes, our sense of being with God as being the doer begins to come upon us. And maybe God's not the complete doer, because we have a part to play in it at first, but eventually we see that ultimately it's all God's doing. But this is a directional goal, and we don't get there in one step, but it's the direction that's more important than the actual attainment for us, certainly at this step in our spiritual path. And so keep these in mind. It's a day-to-day journey, putting ourselves, you could say, immersing ourselves in the waters of calmness. It's like a bath. Try to feel it when you meditate each day. And then you take it out, and then what happens is you start being bombarded, but then you come back again and again. And it's always there. If we can learn to summon it up at the moment, to the degrees that everything, because the world is trying to pull us out of that all the time. And if we can stay in that, we find that then everything in life goes smoothly. Everything in life is not only calm, But then we begin to experience those other aspects that are with calmness, with joy, God's presence. And that's when then we become like Master, perhaps. That's our goal, is in every moment. As Swamiji used to say, even when Master was laughing, doing a good joke, having something that was seemingly outward, Swami said he'd look in Master's eyes and he would see that there was just depth. He was in another space altogether. There was just a depth there of calm, deep, inner stillness that was deep in there. But yet outwardly, he was engaged. He was engaged and he wasn't withdrawn. He would have fun. That's how we want to be, but not lose ourselves in the outwardness, always maintaining that stillness of being in the self. Joy to all of you.